Come prepared.
You're such a
Um,
smart woman.
uh,
You know,
gotta write it all down.
well,
There we go. There we go.
it's kind of a different it's kind of yeah, let's see how it works. Not really. I love the idea of it. So,
Is it working? Okay, just making sure. I'm gonna pull this closer so that we pick it up for the live stream.
okay.
I think we're ready to go. I'm a little out of habit on hosting anything, so forgive me, but I do see cameras, so that makes me feel comfortable. Uh, but this is really this is a dialogue between the two of us that started in one of the offices at Sorensen Center earlier this fall, and we refined it a little bit last week, and now we can have it for public consumption. For those who don't know, Kathy Gannon, the acclaimed correspondent, epic record of the Associated Press covering Afghanistan and Pakistan. I don't want to, I don't want to sell you short. Will you tell us? Will you give us a short history? Will you tell us the short version of the beat?
Yeah.
Because you were in Afghanistan until earlier this year.
Yes, I just left in May. I left
Amazing.
Afghanistan in May. I was there during the Taliban's first rule, and then I was there when they returned. And so I've been covering Afghanistan really since the Soviets were in Afghanistan and when they left. And Pakistan, I also covered the war in South Lebanon and was in northern Iraq for a while, did an embed with the PKK, and then did Central Asia, covered all the Central Asian states for a while as well, just as they shuffled among different leaders. And so, yeah, so that's. And then I just left Afghanistan in May, and I just left Pakistan in August to start the fellowship here at the Shorenstein Center for the fall.
Do you expect to be back?
I will.
Region?
Yes, I will. As a matter of fact, I've been talking to several people. I'll be back in January. I'm doing a couple of books, but one book in particular that I want to do a little bit more research on and revisit some areas. So yeah, I'll be back in January, and I do have a 1-year visa and a work permit, which got me taken to Homeland Security when I arrived in Boston. I'll have you know.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I spent a little time with Homeland Security at the airport.
They should treat Canadians better.
Well, he was very nice. He was a very nice guy, and once we started talking about Afghanistan and the evacuation and some of the issues about the U.S. strategy or lack thereof in Afghanistan, it was actually quite an interesting conversation by the end of it. And he did let me go, despite what I said about the strategy. Or lack
Or lack,
thereof.
right.
Yes, yes. I said it's sort of like the definition of insanity. You keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. But
Right. Well, look, I'm a humble media reporter who suddenly got put on vacation from CNN. So I'm here as a fellow this fall, like Kathy, and we started talking about something that's very fashionable in the media industry right now. Very something that I talked a lot about on reliable sources. Something that you see just today on Axios, an article about a new pro-democracy media company that's launching to try to challenge Donald Trump and extremism in the GOP. It is very fashionable right now, right? We both see it, we all see it, to talk about journalists defending democracy, preserving democracy. We talk about having democracy beat reporters instead of political reporters, democracy reporters. We talk about what newsrooms should be doing to defend democracy against anti-democratic forces. And as all of that conversation and noise and attention is out there in the universe, Kathy, you have been talking about this in a unique way. And at first I bristled at your argument and I panicked a little bit, and but the more I listened, the more interesting it became. So let's figure out what's the right starting point for it. It's that you've listened to all this coverage, you've heard all this commentary, and you've bristled at that. So tell us why.
I do because I feel so strongly about our industry and the value of our industry and the value of reporters. And um, democracy is a system of government, as is communism, as is authoritarianism, as is a theocratic government. It's a system of government, not my job to preserve it, not my job. My job is to inform. It's for people, for the politicians. My job is also. It's not about going out there with the intention of holding the powerful to account. My job is to inform. If I'm going out for a specific purpose or on a specific bandwagon, you actually undermine democracy by the very uh, um, fact of losing your independence to promote a system of government. Your ability to question becomes handicapped. Even to think of the questions. And then there's also the danger that comes with, well, if I ask that, will that somehow seem to support the non democratic forces? How do you define the non democratic forces? Some people would say there is perhaps democracy in America, certainly not democracy in places where America has gone. And the impact of America in other places, governments that have been overthrown. As we all well know, in Chile, a democratically elected government was overthrown for an
Mhm.
authoritarian government to be put in. Iraq, um, the invasion of Iraq, that was by a nation against another nation. Um, and so for me as a reporter, and I guess too, I also differentiate between um, commentators, although I think the public, it's become very muddied. So I think it's very
Right.
difficult for the public. But I think it is so important that we maintain our independence. And once you jump on a bandwagon and see yourself as the champion of democracy. That's not to
Mm.
say you don't do stories about uh, um, access to the ballot box, access to voting rights, access to registration, access. Those are stories. Those are stories that should be told. But it's not my job to preserve democracy. If I do my job, it might assist with freedoms, the free
Mm.
thinking, perhaps, or perhaps not. But I don't write with the intention of accomplishing this. I write with the intention of informing. And
Mm.
I think you undermine democracy, or in my mind, it would undermine if we become this party to. It's a big world out there. And I think it's so important that we inform in the world in which we live, not propagate. And that's the difference.
Mm. In the U.S., there's been uh, this reaction to Donald Trump, but also his
Sure.
allies, attacking the media, denigrating the media, trying to destroy news outlets, and a lot of the defense of democracy has come from that place of there are certain forces trying to hurt American journalism, trying to erase it, and we are going to defend the existence of what we do and stand up against that. Now you face that in a much more hostile way in these war zones where there are obviously folks who are against journalism and don't want you there. So when you look at the American reaction, the American reaction to a very different situation, this hostile former president, what did we get wrong? What did we do wrong in those years?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't, it's not for me to say this was wrong, but eh, somebody wants to attack us, that's fine, not my business. It's not about me. And it just got about responding to everything that was said about the media. Frankly, say whatever you want. I don't care. I mean, but if it's not a story, then for me, I was really kind of shocked at the coverage. Not shocked, shocked is the wrong word, but surprised at what was seen as a story. That
Mm,
for me, I just didn't understand where the story was. What was the value? What were you informing? What were
mm,
you? It was, well, they're saying this about the media. They're saying,
mm,
cares? People can say whatever they want, not my business. And our job is not an easy one. It's not meant to be um, uh, open arms and open doors. And if they close the door on us, my goodness, there was so much coverage of the fact that Donald Trump didn't want to attend the White House Foreign Correspondents' Dinner. Like, who
mm,
cares? I mean, I guess for me, and it's just as a reporter, um, I, I I'm not bound to respond to everything somebody says,
mm,
and it doesn't matter that it's the president of the United States. Um, if there's a story there, as you were saying the other night about all of his tweets and that, and how do you respond? How do you cover? Well, then you tell the larger story
mm,
of um, social media, the impact of social media, the impact of 80 characters, 120 characters, and
sure.
how that. But your mind isn't even open to that if you're always wanting to respond to who's attacking you,
Mhm.
and respond to that. I guess so. It's independent thought is so important.
But I think this gets to whether journalism can function in other systems of government, right? Donald Trump would prefer a much more authoritarian system of government according to his own behavior. Uh, Journalism, I think what many journalists would say is, how would we function in that environment? We need to have a flourishing democracy. Dick Toffel, former ProPublica executive, has said journalism is pro democracy because democracy is pro journalism. You can't unhook the two. And to that you say hogwash.
No, to that I say by uh, um, linking the two, you've undermined both
Mm,
that system and journalism,
mm,
and made our credibility subject to a great deal of questioning, and a great and understandably. Is it easier to do journalism when nobody bothers you? Absolutely, 100%. No question. But there are people doing journalism around the world and in difficult circumstances. Are they doing it in a way that you might know or I might know? But they are, and they're doing it at the
Right,
local level in many countries.
right.
In Afghanistan, is it easy? No, absolutely not. But there are still people getting up every morning, going out, doing an interview, being
Mm,
turned away, going back, trying. And we did such a disservice, I think,
mm,
Brian. And disservice maybe is the wrong choice of words, but when um, journalism emerged in Afghanistan, or emphasis on journalism
mhm,
began in Afghanistan post 2001, I think it was for Afghan journalists, they were somehow led to believe that they were part of this mission, this coalition mission. And
mm.
unfortunately, I believe the
Interesting.
coalition encouraged that, and made them feel that somehow you can't do journalism when there's another system. So we better go because
Ah,
we can, or
and
we
stop
might be,
doing it. Hmm.
yeah, or we might be in danger, and it might be very difficult. And no question, it can be very difficult to do journalism, and I accept that, and I accept that under Trump that there were tremendous difficulties, and people who had never felt threatened before suddenly felt threatened, and felt that we have to react, and then react to other journalists that were maybe supporting Trump, and then it became a
A food fight.
a bit of a food fight, but all under the banner of us, of journalism, and us doing our job. When
Mm,
for me, I think we compromised um, our independence and our
mm,
independence of thought. Are we objective? No. I've got my when I put a lead on the story, I'm looking at it from my, but I
mhm,
want to be independent. I want to have the independent of thought
mm,
where questions can come to my mind. I'm not judging you. I'm not judging you. I'm not um, out to support democracy. I'm not out to hurt democracy. I'm out to inform. I want to know more. I want to understand. I want to question. You have that open curiosity when you're sort of in the back of your head, well, maybe I better not ask because, it might look like I'm supporting um, anti-democratic forces or
Mm.
um, I spoke to a Neiman fellow, and this is just a quick story out there. And she was just talking about, doing stories in one area where she was working, and she wanted to do a little bit different stories and maybe question a little bit more. And she had to say, and she kind of looked over her shoulder, like by saying this, she was questioning democracy because a lot of the stories that she was doing was pro-democracy, and she just said some of the pro-democracy forces really had a lot of layers that maybe were needed to be better understood and better the story told. And so but she felt that she couldn't tell those stories. And she
Mm.
felt that she had to say, but I support democracy, really. I mean, I'm not.
Oh,
So,
oh,
and to
interesting.
me, immediately we have compromised ourselves and our compromised not ourselves, but our ability to.
Mm. Um, has it been, what's it been like being in the US in the last few months and consuming American media? Because you're bringing this wonderful international correspondent perspective to this battle that we're having in the US, where this midterm election, a lot of the arguments about the midterms were who's for democracy and who's against democracy.
Yeah, Brian, such a good question because it's been really interesting for me to be here and um, to read and how things are phrased and battles are phrased, the Republicans and the Democrats and the whole election. Um, and there's some wonderful journalism that goes on. There's no question because you're critical doesn't for a moment suggest that there isn't. Um, but it's become almost like team reporting. I'm on this team. You're on this team. It's team democracy, team liberalism, team this, team
Yeah.
and I think it really undermines it does undermine our credibility. Because people now are suspicious, or well, maybe that's not true, and it opens the door for this whole fake news um, phrasing or whatever, or attack, um, because we have become emotionally involved, and we're not emotionally involved. Um, and I'm not. I mean, it's not my job to protect democracy. It is not my job to, in Afghanistan, to tell the story from the American perspective, from the Canadian perspective. From my job is to try to understand that country, and in some cases, it's where there is U.S. involvement or the coalition. Many cases, it's not. And so, I guess for me, it's really been very good. It's been a really good experience for me, and I think we would do ourselves as reporters um, to think beyond borders and to think a little bit more about um, how we perceive ourselves and as a result of how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive others, because that then affects how you tell a story and even how you're able to question. Because if you're already going into something with judgment, as a lot of reporters do, going into what the Republicans say, and this one supported by Donald Trump, and look at that one lost, so that means Donald Trump doesn't have the support. And I'm trying to think, well, what else does it mean? This means something else. It's got to be much more than that. And so I feel that we are undermining that very system of government, or that it, some seem so anxious to be a part of, saying we preserve it. So yeah, I'm not sure if that explains it.
It does, but I think that the tension of the last 7 years, but let's say the last couple of years, even after Trump left office, barely. I mean, he pretended to have won the election. Is that uh, in the United States, we're, as reporters, we're not used to that level of lying from elected officials or people seeking office. We're used to, yes, a certain level of lying, of course, and we can all go back and talk about examples of that throughout history. But to be in an environment where there's reality denial, the denial of who won and lost an election, of crazed conspiracy theories like QAnon, there's a level of reality distortion that we are all still coming to grips with. And maybe that's not true in other countries, but I think in the US it's been a tumultuous time because of that level of reality denial. And that has caused, to get to our title, some journalists to want to be on the side of decency and democracy, to try to defend reality, in other words, right? Now, I'm not saying that's successful or it's been working or it's right, but it feels to me like that is the X factor. It's what's caused these conversations, this level of reality denial.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I think maybe this is good for
Huh?
the U.S. media because frankly, um, and, I'm of course Donald Trump was a phenomenon, but many people will say he's a symptom of a much deeper uh, um, series of divisions
Right,
and
right.
thought processes and everything that has goes back very far in U.S. history,
Yes.
and maybe this is good for the U.S. media to be more open to questioning. I mean, a lot of people were probably lying to them before, and you just assumed the bar was too high. I mean, like somehow they were they were his level of lying was so much greater. If you are in Central and South, if you were in Central and South America and listening to the lies being told in America about what was being done in Central and South America, and as a result of not questioning those, um, those really difficult situations that were created in these countries by officials here may have been uncovered much earlier, may have had much more exposure if the questioning would have been more intense, more critical. The minds would have been more opening to say, well, I mean, just because the Secretary of State has said, and he's a Secretary of State somehow is a certain level, and so would not um, stoop below that. And it's not to say that uh, people that they would. It's just to say you will look at another country and another defense department official, and you will be very critical, and you think, well, but your own, you'll say, well, we assume a certain level of honesty, and I'm not sure that evidence is really there to justify those assumptions. I think there has been a tremendous amount of lying. Has Donald Trump been much? Was Donald Trump much more without the sophistication?
Yeah,
Without
there was a
sure, but I
brazenness and a
think
senselessness.
I think the bar has been put very high
Mm.
for officials within the United States of America, whereas those same officials in another country you'll be far more critical of. But there is a certain level of assumption that there is a truth that is there, and Donald Trump somehow blew that apart.
Mm.
And in many ways, maybe if reporting would have been less about everything that came out of that man's mouth that had nothing to do with a news value, but Fox was saying this, and so this one had to say that, and that one had to say this, and suddenly that is the news. And I'm thinking, but it's not news. I mean, so what? I mean,
I think what you're coming up against, in my humble opinion, is the perverse reality of media incentive structures today. That what's trending on Twitter is what millions of people see. And it's not, I agree that it's not news per se, but it's what millions of people are seeing, and thus it influences them. Or what Tucker Carlson says at night on Fox is not news per se, but millions of people are seeing it. And so it influences the dialogue and in many cases poisons the dialogue. And so much of what we see on our screens and what becomes nightly news material, is far removed from on the ground reporting and from the scrutiny that you're describing. but it's in part because of these social media echo chambers and partisan media echo chambers where we live in, where I that's why I would argue that a lot of what Trump was saying, or pick your candidate, whatever they're saying, whatever goes viral, is worth scrutinizing because it's reaching millions of people outside of the media, outside of the newsroom system. And that gets to, who sets the agenda, how much influence do newsrooms have over what people are talking about, et cetera. And that's why it's so refreshing to hear you describe it, after living this, and also looking at the U.S. involvement around the world. I mean, I think what you're also hitting at is, correct me if I'm wrong, the way that Western news outlets approach the West's foreign policy decisions and the assumptions that are made in a lot of that news coverage. Even something as simple as whether you call it the war in Iraq or the invasion of Iraq, right? I mean, even the language, think about the language used around Russia's invasion of Ukraine versus US actions in other countries.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right, Brian. And in terms of the scrutiny of U.S. policy abroad, but I think also as reporters, and social media has a tremendous impact, there's no question, and it reaches a tremendous number of people. But once you become part of that chorus and part of that noise, that's all you are, is part of that noise.
Mm.
You're not informing anymore. You're just part of the noise. Well, this one is saying this, Tucker Carlson saying that. It's you're not informing anymore, so that people are and you're absolutely right that Tucker Carlson, for example, reaches a lot of people, and other CNN reaches a lot of people, and but it's become so much a part of this noise and not a part of informing anymore. I've got to counter what this one is saying, and I have to, because it's reaching millions of people, and now the people now are just part of your back and forth with each other, and
Mm.
and not being informed but taking sides. Well, okay,
Mm.
yeah, Brian's making a good point. Well, Tucker Carlson, he's making a good point, and it's not informing anymore. It's now being presenting one side or the other, and so you're not informing to let people decide. You're deciding for them. Our job is not to say this one's not right. This one. Our job is to inform so that the reader has enough information that says, I didn't think of that, but we've stopped even that thought process
Mm.
from the people. Now all the people, or I think a lot of people now, they just think, well, that's the liberal press. Well, that's a conservative press. Even something as, for me, very basic, and I know it's been tradition and everything,
Mm.
for a newspaper to come out in support of a candidate, the very concept of it for me is mind-boggling. I really, it is,
All
because
these editorial board endorsements. Yeah,
yes,
last month. Yeah.
it just, because the reader can't differentiate. Well, so I write a story, but my paper has said, well, we're supporting this
Right.
candidate, and so everybody knows that this paper supports this candidate. But I'm writing and I'm trying to inform, but it informs the public. The fact that newspapers, editorial boards openly endorse a candidate informs the public that that organization, that news organization, is coming from that political standpoint. That impacts how they read my stories. And so that is very important if you're going to have an informed public. And by all this jumping on this bandwagon and arguing with this one, all I think that has happened is that the public is much less informed
Mm.
and much more opinionated. Well, I think that they're really good. Well, I think they're not very good. And so the polarization has just even increased in my mind. I think that that's been the end result.
Mm.
And that's why I feel so strongly, because it's a profession that I've been doing for way 50, and it's an important, it is important, because I do believe people want to know what is going on. I believe they want to be informed, and language and words are important. And for way too long, it was okay to refer to what another country does as torture, for example, yet what the U.S. does, did as enhanced interrogation. Um, I give that just as an example of how we misinform
Mm.
when our job is simply to inform, but we misinform because we, in a, well, it's a democracy. Don't do that. You don't just not, and torture them. That country does that. I mean, we're a democracy. But in fact, that's exactly what happened. And so our lack of informing, our jumping on that bandwagon has undermined, in my mind, and does undermine the very system that people want, presumably, or So
Or expect to have. Right.
yeah.
Right. I think it'd be a lot of fun to open it up and hear what you all say and react and feel. Do we need to use the mic or can we skip it? Do we need? Okay, well, we'll use the mic. Hang on for a second. We'll go to you first, but let's bring the microphone over for the live stream.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you, Brian. Beautiful. My name is Jamil. I was also a former journalist. I used to work at the BBC World Service. I was also teaching journalism, and I find this discussion quite fascinating. I have a triangular question or a comment, and I would like to really to hear the perspectives of both of you. You remember Edmund Burke, who was credited to making the statement about the fourth estate while speaking at the British Parliament, and he referred to the three arms of government, and he said, in the gallery yonder, where the press is sitting, that is the fourth estate to keep a check on us. So from that perspective, don't you think that the history of journalism and democracy were intertwined, and perhaps there is a duty from that perspective for media to defend democracy? That's one part of the argument that kept coming to my mind when you were speaking. But the second point also is to flip the coin. When democracies themselves feel threatened by the media itself, and they try to control the media, and a very good example that comes to mind is when Donald Rumsfeld walked into the correspondent room ahead of the invasion of Iraq and came up with the idea of embedding journalists so that they can control what the media brings out. So in this case, what should the media do? But the third part is, which I found very fascinating about your argument, is the idea of professional journalism, which you are advocating, where, yes, don't tell us what to do, and it's not our duty to opinionate. So it seems there is a complexity here that we need to unearth in our discussion about the role of media on whether to preserve democracy or not to preserve democracy.
I go first? I mean, I'll tell you what comes to my mind about the first part of your question, which is, the fourth estate and the roles of the fourth estate. And I would preface by saying there's lots of types of journalism, right? And the type of journalism that Kathy, you were so well known for, textured, on the ground, nuanced coverage, talking to actually, people actually involved in a story, which is an in-depth report. There is that which is often, very rightly held up as the best of the best. There's lots of other forms of journalism, right? There's just a news alert about a car accident. There's a weather report, but there's also an election projection. Who won a race? And that is it's not going to win an award, but it's still valuable. And I think this week is a really interesting example of that. When the major networks and the AP call races, when we project winners of elections, that has a democracy supporting function. Whether that's the intent or not, I'm not saying that preserves democracy, but when last night all the networks in the AP called Arizona for Katie Hobbs over Carrie Lake. Carrie Lake, one of the most prominent election deniers in the country, very worrisome to think about her having power in Arizona, but came very close. Even Fox had to admit that she lost. And that was based on a projection. It'll take weeks before she'll give up, and maybe she never will. Maybe she'll pretend she won forever. But to me, the networks in the AP have a really valuable democracy supporting function by counting votes and looking at no, they don't count, but they're in there pulling all the data together, analyzing the data, making sure they're at 99.9 whatever percent confidence in the data, and then making a projection. And most people in 2020 and again this year go along with it, and we all accept it. Most Republicans this year have accepted the losses, um, as well as the wins. And I think that's an interesting function of media. And it's not the same as it's not an explicit attempt to defend democracy, but by doing the job correctly and fairly and carefully, it is a defense of democracy, right? Does that make sense? Like, to me, that's a role of the fourth estate. It's not the hold truth to power, show up at the state house, challenge the leaders, but it is providing information to the public and upholding democracy in that small way, in that function. I think we see lots of those functions that we take for granted. 2020 helped us not take them for granted, when the big lie emerged. But to me, that's what comes to mind thinking about what are the granular steps media takes on a daily basis, to uh, to show how the democracy is functioning or not. And that's just an example. But you have some broader questions too, Brian.
No, I think that's very interesting. No, I don't think it's in support of democracy. I think what it is in support of truth. AP only declares when they've even come out with
Yeah,
with
how the
with
model works,
stories how
Yeah.
it is done.
Right.
So you are informed as the reader, as the viewer, that here is how it is done. Not about supporting democracy, not about it's a system of government. That's the system that is going on in the United States of America today. It is that system, and here's how it works. That's what you're being told. You're the reader, and here, in terms of Arizona, right down until it was impossible with the numbers for the other side to have won. So really, for me, and I really do feel strongly, and I'm such a big fan of AP, obviously because I work for them forever, but also because it is about truth. It's not about saying this is
Mhm.
the right one, the wrong one, the good one, the bad one,
Yeah.
the it's about saying, here's how the system works, because it is a system. And here's how we're telling you
Right.
that these two candidates, and here was the voting pattern. Here's how the votes came down. Here's the counts. Here's how we counted. Here's how. And now, because it is impossible, given the number of voters, given the votes that are there for this other candidate in this particular election to win. So it's really it's not in support of this is the system that's going on in America. This is the system. So as a reporter, it was informing, and that's what our job is. I don't care that a politician says we're there to hold, us to really they're the ones who hold us accountable. Oh, please, I mean, first we should be challenged on that because just by not holding when we believe that there's the assumption of lies is more likely coming from Donald Trump and not from I'd say another, but I won't. But from another side or another, that's not our job. And our job is to really be critical in how we report, regardless, and not to make those assumptions because then we can't question critically. Um, I mean, it's what I do is a job. My job is to inform. I'm not some public service on a mission. There are activists who protect freedom of the press, and those are activists, and I believe strongly in them, and I think they're amazing. The Committee to Protect Journalists, so many organizations who really they work so hard to advocate on behalf of journalism. But as a practitioner, as a reporter, my job is to inform. And I have to have that independence of thinking so that regardless of whether it's in America or whether it's in Afghanistan or whether I'm talking to the Taliban or whether I'm talking to Joe Biden or whether I'm going into it with the curiosity that doesn't matter who you are, that you're the president of the United States, so I guess I have to look at you a different way. I have to say this, or I have no, I have to have the curiosity. And for that, I need to have independence. And so it's very important to me. I People can say whatever they want. I don't care. Politicians can do whatever they want. That's what they do. Some of them lie, some of them don't. Some of them go into it to make money. Some of them go into it because they can't do any other job. I mean, but that's their business. My business is to inform as best as I possibly can by going out into wherever and like Arizona, and everybody's going on about, well, and that's very interesting. For me, it's very interesting. Um, it was very close race, and so what does that mean? And how a
Right.
lot of the details I don't really hear or read, because it's just, well, Democrats have taken it, and so now it's over. Well,
Mm,
yay, good news, or too bad. And all that information that just is so
mhm,
interesting to me, is not there, or at least I haven't read it. And of course they just
mhm.
made the call and that. So I come at it from a little bit differently. um, I, um, I do believe that our independence as reporters is extraordinarily important. And that's why I feel that if we, for any moment, feel that our job is anything more than to inform and question with wide open curiosity, um, that we do a disservice to our jobs, and then to the readership and to the viewers. But Brian's also right. There's all kinds of media people. There are commentators. There are opinion makers. And that's a whole different. I think that gets lost on the public.
Right.
But that's
Right.
where I think news organizations like newspapers, it's incumbent on them not to come out in support of a candidate, because it is important that the perception, it's like conflict of interest. You have to be perceived to be, I say, well, yeah, no conflict. It's perception. You have to also be perceived to be
Mm,
independent.
mhm, mhm. Who has the microphone? Let's pass it along. Let's pass it down the line. We can just go straight down the line. That's perfect. Perfect.
Okay, so you say that it's not the role of the media to defend democracy and rather to inform, and also to make sure that that independence of thought is there. But is there a role to preserve an environment, not democracy, not any kind of system of government, but an environment where that independence of thought is able to flourish, or an environment where um, your important role to inform is not impinged on in any way? Or is that rather the role of you as a citizen and not necessarily as a reporter? And the role of the reporter is, no matter how suffocating the environment, to keep going. And kind of how do you land on
Yeah.
that, separating democracy, but just kind of
That freedom of
right.
movement and freedom of it's that's a very good question. And um, as a reporter, it makes it easier for me to do my job when I don't I'm not being followed, and I'm not being threatened, and I'm not being, of course it makes it, but so many of us still do that job, and in so many countries of the world, and in so many different ways. And that it's not an easy job. I don't for a moment mean to at all suggest that this is an easy job. It's a very difficult job, and in some countries it's more difficult, and at sometimes in different countries it's more difficult than at other times. But that doesn't make it um, it any less doesn't change what our role is. It just means it maybe it's a little more difficult to do it. You have to find different ways to do it. Um, for example, I this was when the Taliban were first in power, and I was in Afghanistan, and I wanted to do this interview. And I was just determined I was going to do this interview. I spent 6 hours sitting outside this guy's office until he was so embarrassed he had to let me in, and he was clear. Now, would it have been easier if I could have seen him in the first 5 minutes? And he was willing to talk to the male photographer that was there. And I said, no, he's the photographer. I'm the reporter. And I sat there. I had to sit at the other end of the room, and he got fine. I don't mind. I don't care. I got to ask my questions. I got to do my interview. Was it easy? No. But it was important because this was Chief Justice. It was an interesting case. I needed to hear what he had to say. So yes, the environment in which we work, if it can be easier, yay. But that also doesn't mean that um, it's not my job to make that environment. My job is to work within the environment. And in America, I think journalists found in the previous administration difficulties that they hadn't encountered before or hadn't thought about as much before. So and so in some ways, I think this is very good. Maybe it's a very good awakening for journalists here because the job is not easy, and you will have people lying to you, and you will have people who are blustering, and you have to figure out how do you tell the story and how do you do your job. So I'm not sure I answered that question, but I rambled a lot.
You, Brian and Kathy. My name is Ariel, and I'm a graduate student at HKS. My question for you is around media and social media. And I feel like the line between the two are very blurry right now, right? A lot of people read their news on social media. So interested on your take in terms of media's role in the era of social media. Because now I think a lot of people are having this criticism on social media in terms of actually destroying the democracy because of misinformation and all of that. So what's your take on that as we kind of evolve how people consume the news and media?
You first. Look, I think we will look back in 50 years and we're going to see so many studies from Harvard and elsewhere where 2010, 2011, 2012 was a turning point for so much in our society. We're going to find it about how children developed. We're going to find it about how our brains have changed. We're going to find all these changes, and they're all going to trace back to Twitter and Facebook. And some of them we've already seen some of that research. I mean, it's happening actively, right? You can see it in the leaks from Facebook about Instagram, about what it's done to young women's portrayal. Well, I do blame it is Steve Jobs' fault. That's right. Yep, 2007. Yep, it is Steve Jobs' fault because he put these in our pockets and our phones and our hands, and then they created social networks for us to spend all day on. I mean, I do deeply believe that. But look, it is the environment. We have to reckon with it. It's not going to change. The phones aren't going to go away. They're only going to get more powerful. We have to live in this environment. And the problem that you identify about the blurring between reporters on the ground and commentators in the studio and partisans on social media is only going to get blurrier. And I don't know of ways to make it less blurry. Look, I think about times at CNN where I was reporting 1 minute and literally the next minute I was commenting, right? I mean, you can, in theory, it would be wonderful to try to split all that apart. In reality, I see no way to do it. And I'd love to be proven wrong. So I do think all that traces back to Steve Jobs and the iPhone and thus the invention of these social networks. But we then have to, I think there's two sets of constituencies then. Journalists have to figure out the best ways to exist in that environment. And then everybody using those services has to know what they're doing on those services. I do think the meltdown at Twitter may have some silver linings, right? Hopefully we're going to see something new flourish. We're going to see new alternatives pop up. Hopefully that'll be a good thing. And I am interested in what the Times and other outlets have done, trying to discourage journalists' social media use, trying to at least tamp it down, especially around Twitter, which is addictive in so many ways. That probably, it may be too little too late, but it's probably worth the experimenting.
Yeah, I mean, I think Brian's so right. I mean, I think we're going to find out so much more as years go by, and I think AP has had for years a very strict policy. Nobody wants your opinion on anything. You
Mhm.
cannot give your opinion on anything on social media. So there's that. But I think you're absolutely right. But I think also there are some things that the reporters can do because we are still reporters. It's for example, and there was talked about this story on Pelosi's husband and all, well, people are saying this, well, people are saying that, and then making that into a story. Because it's out there. Well, but it's not a story. More you could tell the story about social media, and if you want to get into and peel the layers away about how people are using it, and turn it into something that informs people on the lies coming out of social media or the impact or that kind of thing, so the reader is like you, challenging and think, oh yeah, that's right, as opposed to us as reporters getting right into the fray and regurgitating what's on social media and regurgitating what's on Twitter and regurgitating what this outlet says and that outlet says, and not giving it um, a giving it a news value when it is a news value, not just because it's out there. And that's become very difficult.
This is where we disagree on Pelosi. I think the fact that so many Republicans wanted to believe crazy lies about Pelosi's husband is a symptom of a disease that we need to study and understand.
Studying it, and I'm not sure it's Republicans. See, then it becomes this team thing.
Well, I don't know of any Democrats that made up those
But-
crazy
but,
lies.
but we don't know. That's all I'm
We
saying.
can say with 99% confidence
No,
that
but
it was
but
conservatives
when
who
you
made up
do, but
crazy
then you
lies.
have to do a study and to say, as a reporter, you have to do you have to know. Otherwise, it's just feeding the frenzy as opposed to in any way giving people information that then they can make a choice. Yeah, well, gee, I didn't realize that. Well, yeah, that's not for me to say that this is a Republican ploy or this is, and holding the Democrats above all of that, or again, and I'm not saying that you're wrong because you might very well be absolutely right. But all I'm saying is that my job is that's not my job. My job is to look at it and say, okay, I mean, this is really that somebody is attacked of that significance,
Mhm.
and where they were looking for Pelosi, and this is but to repeat things just because they're out there, and then to try to say that this then is reflective of a Republican mindset or of a party affiliation links that I. I just feel there where we're not informing, we're just jumping on that same bandwagon, or not bandwagon, that's the wrong word.
To
but
give
jumping-
oxygen, yeah.
and without giving any information, it's really just giving oxygen to a lot of rumors. And well, I heard that so and so was. Well, wasn't there some sort of, I mean, I could say something out of the blue and somewhere said, and then nobody else, and then suddenly that's something. And I think our job is even more difficult than ever before because of social media, because as you so rightly point out about the blurring. So our job is even that much more important, that we are independent, are challenging these accepted, well, this is it must be them or must be them. I just think that it's become even more important for us to really be that much more independent, so we really peel away those layers and not get into the fray and become part of that noise.
We had one more, yeah.
I'm Jason Munyon, a graduate student at HKS. Kind of related to this last discussion, there's a tradition in the US with elections of the October surprise.
Yeah.
So shortly before the weeks leading up to the election, then a campaign releases juicy dirt to try to catch a candidate off guard. It gets hard for them to rebut the allegations, and that's what's on the mind of voters that go to the polls. So you could say that this last election, there's a Herschel Walker, and the abortions could be considered an October surprise. In the last presidential election, there was the Hunter Biden tapes, or the laptop, I'm sorry. And at the time, there had the hallmarks of Russian interference in the election, and so the New York Post was blocked from Twitter because they had broken that story, and they were blocked for reporting that. And it was not given a lot of coverage because it was considered that maybe this was interference or these aren't authentic. Since then, now we know that the emails were authentic. What do you think is the right way to handle these kinds of situations, like the Hunter Biden laptop? Are there situations where there isn't much time necessarily to verify or to investigate this kind of information? Should there be a pause that we don't disclose them at all, or should we disclose them with a lot of caveats? What do you think is the right way to handle these kinds of situations?
Well, I think if you can't verify, you can't report. It's as simple as that. If you can't verify, can't report. If you have a leader saying something and you can't verify it and it impacts something, then you have to be able to do sufficient reporting or do your reporting so that you're able to give the reader the information that is there, that okay, here's what is I have to say the Hunter Biden laptop. I mean, I'm familiar, of course, but I was really busy in Afghanistan. so so I mean, but I think, of course, I mean, there's a news value in that there is that impacting an election campaign. And this is the reason why he's the son of a candidate in the election. And people can understand that. I mean, and then you can, if you don't have verifiable information about whether or not the material on the laptop or that it was, then if you can't verify, you can't report. You don't get to say, well, but so and so said, so I just said what so and so said. Now it's impacting an election. That's this whole story. I mean, because the story wasn't frankly about Hunter Biden. It was about Hunter Biden because he's the son of President Biden. So there's your story. I mean, that is the story. I mean, the rest was just a lot of detail about. So that's what you're talking about. That's the story. And how does that impact the election? And does it impact the election? Is it going to how is it being used by this one? How is it being used by that one? How is it impacting? Is it impacting? Well, it's not impacting. That is all information that you can give by doing your reporting on that subject. Our job is not, again, and I know I said it, but it's not an easy job. It's not. You really have to do a lot of work in terms of trying to find the answers, trying to get hold of people, trying to find out what the details are, who's it impacting, how's it impacting. Those are all important questions that you need to be able to try to answer, but you have to be thinking independently enough that you're able to even come up with all those questions and have all that curiosity. Otherwise, it's easy to just say, well, it's this or it's that.
I would just say Twitter shouldn't have blocked the link. We're at time, so we will wrap it up there. I want to thank folks on the live stream who tuned in and on Zoom. And thank you, Kathy, for the dialogue. Thanks for getting us thinking.
Thank you.
Thank you.